The Voshkari had never been wrong. In 17,000 cycles of expansion across the spiral arm, their first contact protocols had predicted, categorized and successfully integrated 463 species into the Galactic Cooperative. The protocols were mathematics made manifest, sociology crystallized into law, psychology weaponized into diplomacy. When the survey drones detected the electromagnetic chatter from Sol 3, the Voshkari Academic Council convened with quiet confidence. They had done this before. They would do it perfectly again. High theorist Kailash ran 3 sets of manipulator appendages across the holographic data streams, his carapace gleaming under the neutral lighting of the analysis chamber. The readings were textbook: a single planet species, early industrial age, fractured into competing political entities, nuclear capability recently achieved but not yet fully weaponized into planetary deterrence, perfect timing. They were ripe. The simulations are conclusive, Kailash announced to the assembled council, his translated voice carrying the harmonics of absolute certainty. Homo sapiens follow the standard psychological framework for bilateral symmetrical species, tribal identity formation, hierarchical social structures, resource competition mediated through symbolic exchange. We have encountered this pattern 78 times. Junior analyst Prendock, barely 300 cycles old, and still retaining the bright green coloring of youth, projected a subcategory analysis into the shared data space. Their fiction is particularly telling. High theorist? They imagine contact scenarios constantly. Approximately 43% envision hostile encounters, 51% imagine benevolent guidance, and 6% produce incomprehensible narratives involving tentacles and reproduction. Several council members flashed amusement colors across their carapaces. Typical pre-contact anxiety. Kailash confirmed. Deploy Protocol 7. We approach as benevolent elders. Superior technology demonstrated through non-threatening displays offer solutions to their resource scarcity and environmental degradation. Within 2 of their solar rotations, they will be petitioning for protectorate status. The vote was unanimous. It always was. 3 months later, the Voshkari delegation descended through Earth's atmosphere, in vessels designed to inspire awe without triggering primal threat responses. Smooth curves, pearl-white hulls, propulsion systems that made no sound. They chose Geneva as the landing site, neutral ground, symbolic infrastructure, maximum media coverage. Kailash emerged first, his translation device already parsing the babble of human languages into coherent patterns. The welcoming committee was exactly as predicted. Government officials in formal attire, military personnel maintaining respectful distance, media representatives documenting everything with primitive optical recording devices. People of Earth, Kailash began, his words transmitted simultaneously in 47 human languages. We come as friends and guides. The Galactic Cooperative welcomes you to the greater community of intelligent life. The expected response would be wonder, gratitude, perhaps some fear carefully managed through diplomatic channels. Instead, the lead human diplomat, a woman with the designation Ambassador Chen Wei, smiled in a way that made Kailash's threat assessment subroutines activate unexpectedly. Welcome to Earth, High Theorist, she said. We've prepared accommodations and scheduled preliminary discussions. However, I should mention that our response to your arrival may not follow your anticipated trajectory. Kailash dismissed this as posturing. Primitive species always attempted to project confidence during first contact. It was in the protocols. The first deviation occurred during the technology demonstration. The Voshkari had brought a standard package: medical devices that could cure most diseases, energy systems that could eliminate scarcity, agricultural enhancements that could end hunger. These gifts had never failed to generate the appropriate sense of obligation and dependency. The human observers watched politely as Kailash's team displayed the medical scanner, a device that could diagnose and treat cellular dysfunction with 98% accuracy. A human physician, Dr. Geng Kuo, from Lagos, examined the device with interest, asked several technical questions, then said something that appeared nowhere in the protocols. Fascinating work with quantum entanglement in the scanning array. We've been exploring similar principles, but our approach uses recursive neural networks to handle the uncertainty collapse. Have you considered integrating adaptive algorithms instead of fixed diagnostic trees? It might improve your accuracy in novel biological contexts. Keleshnor experienced a sensation his species had no word for, primarily because they had never needed one. Confusion was not part of the protocol framework. You understand the mechanism? He asked. The basics, certainly, Dr. Okonkwo replied. We'd need access to your full technical documentation to provide meaningful feedback, but from what you've shown us, there are several potential optimization pathways. I can introduce you to our quantum biology research teams if you're interested in collaborative development. This was not how gifts worked. Gifts created gratitude and dependency. Gifts did not generate peer review suggestions. The agricultural demonstrations went similarly awry. The Voshkari crop enhancement system increased yields by 200% through optimized genetic expression. The human agricultural scientists, a collective including representatives from 6 continents, nodded appreciatively, then spent 3 hours discussing how the system could be modified for Earth's diverse climate zones, debating the ecological implications of implementation, and suggesting integration approaches that accounted for existing farming practices and cultural food preferences. They treated the galaxy's most advanced agricultural technology like an interesting prototype requiring field testing. By the 3rd day, Keleshnor requested an emergency consultation with the Voshkari vessel's senior analytical staff. Junior analyst Prendok had turned a disturbing shade of confusion orange. The protocols are not engaging, Prendok reported, manipulating data streams with increasingly frantic gestures. The humans demonstrate appropriate interest in our technology, but they refuse to adopt the dependent grateful behavioral framework. They keep asking questions, detailed, technically sophisticated questions. They want to understand not just what our systems do, but how they work, why we made specific design choices, and whether alternative approaches might be more suitable for their context. This is the scientific method, Keleshnor said, trying to reassure himself as much as his staff. Primitive species often display curiosity before accepting guidance. We should proceed to Phase 2, demonstration of cultural and philosophical superiority. The cultural exchange began promisingly. The Voshkari had brought archives of their civilization's greatest achievements: art, music, literature, mathematical proofs, philosophical treatises. 17,000 cycles of development across 100 worlds. This repository had overwhelmed every previous contact species with the vast gulf between their primitive cultures and Voshkari's sophistication. The humans organized viewing parties. Keleshnor attended one at Ambassador Chen's invitation, held in what she called a community center in a city designated New York. Approximately 200 humans gathered in a large room consuming various nutritional preparations. While Voshkari cultural works displayed on primitive screens, they critiqued everything. A human art historian, Professor Alvarez, spent 20 minutes analyzing a Voshkari sculpture that had taken 300 cycles to complete, comparing it to something called brutalist architecture, and suggesting that the artist might have been influenced by the mathematical principles of crystalline growth patterns. She was exactly correct, and her analysis demonstrated sophisticated understanding of the work's underlying conceptual framework. Then she said, "It's quite beautiful, but have you explored organic integration in your sculptures? The rigid geometry is mathematically elegant, but living systems often achieve structural beauty through asymmetric growth. I could introduce you to some of our bio-artists if you're interested in alternative aesthetic frameworks." A human musician, Kehinde, who carried a stringed instrument, listened to a Voshkari symphonic composition that mathematically incorporated the harmonic signatures of 7 different stellar phenomena. When it concluded, he smiled and said, "The polyrhythmic structure is brilliant, very similar to West African drumming traditions. Actually, the way you layer the stellar frequencies reminds me of how we use multiple time signatures simultaneously. Have you ever worked with variable tempo? It can create really interesting tension if you let the rhythm breathe instead of maintaining strict mathematical precision." This was not cultural dominance. This was conversation, exchange, dialogue between equals. Keleshnor's certainty cracked. The philosophical symposium was scheduled for day 5. This was the moment where the Voshkari would demonstrate the superiority of their ethical frameworks, their conflict resolution strategies, their societal organization principles. These demonstrations had convinced species far older and more technologically advanced than humanity that Voshkari civilization represented the optimal path forward. The humans brought lawyers, not military commanders, or religious leaders, or even their most prominent politicians. They brought legal scholars, human rights advocates, political philosophers, and several individuals designated as devil's advocates, whose apparent function was to argue against any consensus. Galactic presented the Voshkari system of governance, a meritocratic hierarchy where the most intelligent, most educated, most capable individuals made decisions for the collective good. Optimal resource distribution, maximal efficiency, minimal conflict. Mathematics proven over millennia. A human philosopher, Dr. Adaptability from a place called Oxford, listened carefully, nodded thoughtfully, then asked, "How do you account for the inherent bias in defining merit? Intelligence is context-dependent. What counts as capability varies across different problem domains. Who decides which skills and knowledge qualify someone to make decisions affecting everyone? And if your most intelligent individuals are making these determinations, aren't you creating a self-reinforcing system where one type of intelligence perpetuates its own definition of merit?" Galactic had 17 different responses prepared for challenges to Voshkari governance. None of them addressed this particular question, because the question assumed a level of systemic analysis that primitive species were not supposed to possess. "Our system has produced stable civilization for 17,000 cycles," Galactic said, falling back on empirical evidence. "Stability isn't the only metric for success," another human interjected, Professor Kim, who specialized in something called political theory. "Adaptability matters. Innovation requires disruption. Some of humanity's greatest advances came from challenging established systems. If your governance structure optimizes for stability, how do you prevent stagnation? How do you ensure you can respond to genuinely novel challenges that fall outside your existing knowledge frameworks?" The symposium continued for 7 hours. The humans wanted to discuss edge cases, failure modes, unintended consequences, systemic blind spots, and theoretical alternatives. They treated Voshkari's civilization, 17,000 cycles of unprecedented success, like an interesting case study with both strengths and weaknesses worth examining. That night, Galactic stood alone in his quarters aboard the vessel, staring at the rotating hologram of Earth. The protocols were not working. Not failing exactly, but not working as they should. The humans were not becoming dependent supplicants grateful for guidance. They were becoming colleagues, partners, peers. It should not be possible. They were barely spacefaring. They still killed each other over resource distribution. They had only recently achieved global communication networks. By every metric the protocols used to assess developmental stage, they should be millennia away from engaging with galactic cooperative technology and culture as anything other than recipients of charity. Junior analyst Prendock entered the quarters, carapace flickering with uncertainty colors. "High theorist, I have completed the psychological assessment you requested. The results are problematic." "Explain." "Humans don't fit our categorization frameworks. They display characteristics from multiple incompatible species profiles simultaneously. They have strong tribal identity formation like aggressive territorial species, but they also form cooperative bonds across genetic lines like hive species. They maintain rigid hierarchical structures like dominance-based species, but they constantly challenge and overthrow those hierarchies like anarchic species. They are competitive and cooperative, aggressive and empathetic, traditional and innovative, all at the same time, often within the same individual." Galactic felt another unfamiliar sensation. His threat assessment systems were not registering danger, but his pattern recognition systems were failing to find stable patterns. That should not be psychologically sustainable. "It isn't by our models." Prendock agreed. "Humans exist in a constant state of internal contradiction. They call it things like work-life balance, cognitive dissonance, having mixed feelings. They don't seem to find it problematic. They've built their entire civilization around accommodating and even celebrating contradictory impulses. That's," Galactic searched for the right word, "that's adaptive. Extremely adaptive." "Yes, high theorist. And it means they don't respond to our protocols because the protocols assume species will have stable, predictable psychological frameworks. Humans don't. They adapt their frameworks based on context. They're not one type of species. They're every type of species, depending on the situation. The next morning, Ambassador Chen Wei requested a private meeting with Kelishnar. They met in one of the human diplomatic facilities, a room with primitive furniture designed for their bilateral body plan, large windows showing the surrounding city, and a beverage preparation system. Chen used to create something called coffee. "We've been grateful for your presentations," Chen began, settling into a chair with casual comfort. "Your technology is impressive, your culture is rich, and your civilization has clearly achieved remarkable things. But I think we need to have an honest conversation about expectations." "Proceed," Kelishnar said, activating his translation systems to capture every nuance. "You came here expecting us to join your cooperative as junior members. Students learning from experienced teachers, children receiving guidance from wise elders." Chen sipped her coffee. "That framework isn't going to work for humanity. Ambassador Chen, I assure you we intend no condescension." "Oh, I'm not offended," Chen interrupted, smiling that disconcerting smile again. "I'm just being direct. High theorist, you've shown us wonders. Medical technology that could save billions of lives. Energy systems that could end scarcity. Agricultural advances that could eliminate hunger. These are extraordinary gifts, and we appreciate them. But we're not going to implement them blindly. We would provide full technical support. That's not the issue." Chen leaned forward. "The issue is that we've been solving these problems ourselves in our own ways for our entire history. Sometimes we succeed. Sometimes we fail. But we learn from both outcomes. If we simply adopt your solutions without understanding them, without adapting them to our context, without making them ours, then we're not growing. We're just becoming dependent. Dependency on superior technology is not shameful. It is to us," Chen said firmly. "Look, I've read your first contact protocols. Yes, we hacked your communication systems on day 2. Don't look so surprised. You broadcasted in 47 languages simultaneously, which meant we could triangulate the source code. Your protocols are brilliant for species that fit your models. But humanity doesn't fit models well. We're messy. We're contradictory. We do things that don't make sense by any logical framework, and somehow it works." Kelishnar felt his certainty crumbling further. "What are you proposing?" "Partnership," Chen said simply. "Not student-teacher. Not protectorate. Protector. Actual partnership. You have technologies we need. We have perspectives you haven't considered. You've achieved stability we haven't. We have adaptability you might lack. Instead of trying to guide us into your civilization's shape, work with us to figure out what shape makes sense for humanity joining the galactic community." "That's not how the protocols work." "Then maybe the protocols need updating," Chen suggested. "How many of those 463 species you've contacted were actually fundamentally different from each other? Or did you just help them all become versions of Voshkari civilization?" The question struck like a physical blow. Kelishnar returned to the vessel and immediately pulled the full archive of previous contact scenarios. He ran analysis algorithms that had never been applied before, looking not at successful integration metrics, but at cultural diversity preservation. The results were devastating. Species that joined the Galactic Cooperative did prosper. They did advance technologically. They did achieve stability and peace. But they also became similar. Their art started reflecting Voshkari aesthetic principles. Their governance structures adopted Voshkari frameworks. Their scientific research followed Voshkari methodological approaches, not identical but recognizably shaped by the same underlying assumptions. The Voshkari had not been sharing civilization. They had been replicating it, and humanity was refusing to replicate. The Voshkari diplomatic corps had never faced a stalemate before. Ambassador Chen's proposal for equal partnership had created chaos in the cooperative's administrative hierarchy. Protocol revisions required council approval. Council approval required precedent. There was no precedent for this. 463 successful integrations had established clear patterns, demonstrate superiority, offer assistance, accept gratitude. establish protectorate relationships, gradually integrate into the cooperative's cultural and technological frameworks. Humanity wanted to skip several steps and rewrite the entire process. High theorist Keleshiner found himself in the unprecedented position of requesting guidance from his superiors rather than providing it. The response came 3 weeks later, transmitted across interstellar distances with bureaucratic efficiency. Maintain diplomatic presence, continue cultural exchange, gather additional data on human adaptability characteristics, determine if their resistance to standard integration represents fundamental incompatibility or merely delayed acceptance. In other words, figure out what's wrong with the humans or figure out what's wrong with our approach. Keleshiner chose to interpret this directive broadly. If the protocols were not engaging because humans did not fit expected patterns, then perhaps understanding the source of human adaptability would reveal a solution. He proposed an extended exchange program. Voshkari observers embedded in human institutions, human observers given access to Voshkari facilities and databases. Ambassador Chen agreed immediately, with the caveat that the exchange be genuinely reciprocal. Junior analyst Prendok volunteered for the human immersion program. 3 months later, Keleshiner barely recognized his colleague. Prendok arrived at the Geneva facility wearing something humans called a jacket, apparently unnecessary clothing that served aesthetic rather than protective functions. His carapace had developed subtle color variations that mimicked human fashion sensibilities. Most disturbingly, he had adopted human gestural communication patterns, moving his manipulator appendages in ways that suggested meaning independent of spoken language. High theorist. Prendok's translated voice carried inflections that had not been present before. Enthusiasm? Excitement? You have to see what I've learned. The humans are extraordinary. Their adaptability isn't just psychological, it's cultural, technological, institutional. They've built entire systems around the assumption that conditions will change and they'll need to change with them. Keleshiner gestured toward the meeting chamber. Provide detailed analysis. I was embedded with a human institution called MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Prendok began, projecting holographic data as he spoke. It's an educational facility, but unlike our academies, it doesn't just transmit knowledge. It actively encourages students to challenge established theories, to experiment with untested approaches, to fail repeatedly in pursuit of novel solutions. They celebrate failure as a learning opportunity. That seems inefficient. That's what I thought initially, Prendok admitted. But then I observed the results. Human technological advancement doesn't follow our linear progression model. They make intuitive leaps, pursue seemingly irrational research directions, and combine unrelated fields in ways that shouldn't work but somehow do. A student I observed was developing a medical device inspired by studying how bees navigate. Bees, high theorist, flying insects. What do they have to do with medical technology? Nothing by any logical framework. Exactly. And yet the device works. It solves a problem our medical scanners miss, because the student approached the challenge from a completely different conceptual angle. Prendok's carapace flashed excited green. They call it cross-pollination of ideas. They deliberately mix unrelated domains to generate innovation. Keleshiner processed this information, running it against everything he knew about technological development. The Voshkari approach was systematic. Identify problem, research optimal solution, implement efficiently. It had produced 17,000 cycles of steady advancement, but steady was not the same as rapid. And optimal within known frameworks did not account for unknown frameworks. What about their social systems? Keleshiner asked. Did you observe their governance structures? Oh, that's even more fascinating, Prendok said. They don't have one governance structure. They have dozens. Democracies, republics, monarchies, federations, city-states, tribal councils, corporate hierarchies, non-profit collectives. Some work well, some work poorly, but they maintain this diversity intentionally. They call it political experimentation. If one system encounters a problem it can't solve, they observe how other systems handle similar challenges and adapt accordingly. That sounds chaotic. It is chaotic, Prendok agreed cheerfully. It's also resilient. When I asked a political scientist, Professor Okafor, about the inefficiency of maintaining multiple governance models, she said something remarkable. Efficiency is optimizing for known conditions. Resilience is surviving unknown conditions. We keep different systems around because we don't know what challenges we'll face next, and we might need approaches that seem inefficient now but turn out to be essential later. Kalashnikov felt his worldview continuing its uncomfortable evolution. The Voshkari had optimized for known conditions. They had encountered 63 species types, categorized them into behavioral frameworks, and developed protocols for each category. Elegant, efficient, completely unprepared for a species that defied categorization. I need to see this firsthand, Kalashnikov decided. Ambassador Chen arranged for Kalashnikov to visit several human institutions across their planet. The experience was deliberately disorienting. Chen wanted him to see diversity, not representativeness. He visited a startup technology company in Bangalore, where humans barely past adolescence were developing quantum computing approaches that Voshkari researchers had dismissed as theoretically impossible. He attended a jazz performance in New Orleans where musicians created complex art through structured improvisation, deliberately introducing chaos into mathematical patterns. He observed a United Nations assembly where humans argued passionately about resource distribution, sometimes agreeing, sometimes deadlocking, somehow maintaining cooperation despite fundamental disagreements. Nothing fit the protocols. Everything worked anyway. The moment of true revelation came in Tokyo, at a facility dedicated to disaster response training. Japan, Chen explained, was a nation that had experienced tsunamis, earthquakes, nuclear disasters, and warfare. They had built entire cultural and technological systems around the assumption that catastrophic failure was not just possible but inevitable. The facility director, a woman named Tanaka Riko, walked Kalashnikov through their training scenarios. We practice for earthquakes we hope will never come. We design buildings to flex instead of break. We drill evacuation procedures until they become instinct. We accept that we cannot prevent disasters, so we optimize for recovery. This seems pessimistic, Kalashnikov observed. Tanaka smiled. No, it's realistic. Optimism without preparation is just wishful thinking. We hope for the best and prepare for the worst. That's not pessimism, that's wisdom. She showed him a traditional Japanese art form called kintsugi, where broken pottery was repaired with gold-laced adhesive. The cracks were not hidden but highlighted, turned into part of the object's beauty and history. We break, we repair, we become stronger at the broken places, Tanaka explained. Your protocols assume species will adopt your systems and avoid the mistakes you've already made. But maybe mistakes are necessary. Maybe breaking and repairing is how you become truly resilient. That evening, Kalashnikov requested another private meeting with Ambassador Chen. They met in a traditional tea house in Kyoto, sitting on cushions in a room that had apparently existed for 600 years. Ancient by human standards, a brief moment by Voshkari measures. Your species makes no sense, Kalashnikov said without preamble. Thank you, Chen replied, pouring tea with practiced grace. That was not a compliment, wasn't it? Chen smiled. Hi, theorist, let me tell you something about humanity. We're survival specialists. Not because we're the strongest or the smartest or the fastest. We're survival specialists. Because we never stop adapting. We've survived ice ages, plagues, wars, famines, and countless disasters. Every time something nearly destroys us, we learn from it and change. We don't have one optimal strategy. We have a million suboptimal strategies that collectively cover almost any contingency. That's actually strategically sophisticated, Kalashnikov admitted. We're not primitive, high theorist. We're just different. Chen sipped her tea. Your protocols work beautifully for species that fit predictable patterns. But what happens when the cooperative encounters something genuinely unprecedented? A crisis that doesn't fit your models? A problem that can't be solved with existing frameworks. We would research, analyze, develop appropriate responses. While a world burns because you're still analyzing, Chen interrupted gently. Humans don't always have time for optimal solutions. Sometimes we need fast, messy, barely functional solutions right now. We're good at improvisation because we've had to be. Kalashnikov sat in silence, drinking the bitter tea and processing implications that seemed to expand infinitely. The cooperative had achieved magnificent things. Peace across 100 worlds, technological marvels, cultural preservation, longevity and prosperity for billions of beings. But it had achieved these things by creating stability, predictability, and order. What happened when the galaxy became unpredictable? "I need to propose something highly irregular," Kelestru said finally. 3 months later, the Voshkari Council convened for an unprecedented session. The entire assembly gathered in the Great Forum on the Cooperative's administrative world. Nearly 2,000 council members representing every member species. Keleshnor stood at the central podium, feeling the weight of tradition and expectation. "Honored Council," he began, following ritual formulations that had opened every session for millennia. "I come before you to propose revision of our first contact protocols." The chamber erupted in surprised harmonics. Protocols were revised occasionally, but such revisions were incremental improvements, not fundamental changes. "The human species has revealed a critical limitation in our approach," Keleshnor continued. "We have been highly successful at integrating species that match established patterns. We have not tested our systems against species that actively resist pattern matching. I propose that humanity represents not a failure of our protocols but an opportunity to expand them." Senior Counselor Vreshtek, whose carapace bore the dark colors of extreme age, projected a question into the shared data space. "You suggest the protocols are inadequate." "I suggest they are incomplete," Keleshnor clarified. "We have optimized for order, stability, and predictable advancement. Humans optimize for adaptability even at the cost of efficiency. Both approaches have merit. I propose we offer humanity not protectorate status, but associate membership, a new category where species maintain their own governance systems while participating in technological and cultural exchange." The debate lasted 3 days. Arguments flew through the data space in complex cascades of logic, precedent, and philosophy. Some council members worried that allowing humanity to maintain independence would undermine the cooperative's cohesion. Others argued that adaptability might be precisely what the cooperative needed as it expanded into increasingly diverse regions of the galaxy. Finally, Senior Counselor Vreshtek called for a vote. "The question before us: shall we create a new category of membership to accommodate species that resist standard integration protocols?" The vote was not unanimous. For the first time in recorded history, the Voshkari Council was divided, but it was enough, 63% in favor, sufficient to authorize the experimental program. Keleshnor returned to Earth with the news. Ambassador Chen received him in Geneva, her expression carefully neutral. "The Council has approved associate membership," Keleshnor announced. "You would have access to our technological databases, cultural archives, and diplomatic networks. In exchange, you would contribute your own knowledge and participate in cooperative initiatives, but you would maintain complete sovereignty over your own systems, governance, and cultural development." "What's the catch?" Chen asked. "No catch, but also no guarantee. Associate membership is untested. We don't know if it will work. You would be." Keleshnor paused, searching for the right human idiom. "Guinea pigs." Chen laughed, a sharp sound of genuine amusement. "High theorist, I think you're starting to understand us." "Yes, we accept. When do we start?" "Immediately. However, I should warn you, the Council also voted to implement a reciprocal exchange. Several member species are interested in studying human adaptability techniques. We would like to send researchers, observers, and students to learn from your institutions." "You want to learn from us?" Chen's eyebrows rose. "We want to ensure the cooperative can survive challenges we haven't imagined yet," Keleshnor said. "Your species has spent its entire existence surviving the unexpected. We would like to understand how you do it." Over the following years, the experiment produced results that startled everyone involved. Human researchers gained access to technologies that leapfrogged their development timeline by centuries, but they didn't simply adopt Voshkari technology. They adapted it, modified it, combined it with their own approaches in ways that sometimes failed spectacularly and sometimes produced innovations that impressed even species millennia ahead of humanity. Meanwhile, Voshkari observers returned from Earth with unsettling reports. A researcher who studied human art came back creating sculptures that deliberately incorporated asymmetry and imperfection. A political scientist who observed human governance structures proposed experimental modifications to cooperative administrative systems. A technologist who worked with human engineers developed an AI framework that used intuitive leaps rather than pure logic, producing faster solutions to certain problem categories. Slowly, carefully, the cooperative began to change. 5 years after first contact, Kalashnar attended a symposium on Sol 3 where both humans and member species of the cooperative presented research. A joint team of human and Voshkari researchers presented findings on adaptive medical technology that combined the precision of Voshkari diagnostic systems with the improvisational flexibility of human emergency medicine. The resulting system was messier than pure Voshkari technology, less elegant than optimal human approaches, and significantly more effective than either species had achieved independently. During the reception afterward, a young human researcher, Dr. Chawanga from Nairobi, approached Kalashnar with enthusiasm that still felt slightly overwhelming to Voshkari's sensibilities. "Hi, theorist. I wanted to thank you for making this collaboration possible. The access to your technological databases has accelerated my research by decades. Your own contributions have been equally valuable," Kalashnar replied, finding that he meant it sincerely. "Your approach to problem-solving has challenged many of our assumptions." "That's actually what I wanted to ask you about," Dr. Chawanga said. "In your culture, challenging assumptions is that uncomfortable, because we've noticed some Voshkari researchers seem distressed when humans question established frameworks." Kalashnar considered this carefully. "For 17,000 cycles, we have not needed to question our frameworks. They have worked perfectly for every situation we encountered. Until we met you. So yes, it is uncomfortable. But discomfort is not always bad. I am learning that from your species." Chawanga smiled. "My grandmother used to say comfort is where growth goes to die. I think you're discovering that too." Later that evening, Kalashnar stood on the facility's observation deck, looking out at the lights of human civilization spread across the darkened landscape. Prendak joined him, the younger analyst carapace now permanently displaying the subtle color variations he'd adopted during his human immersion. "The Council is calling the human experiment a success," Prendak said. 3 more species have requested associate membership instead of protectorate status. They want to maintain their diversity while accessing cooperative resources. "The protocols are adapting," Kalashnar observed. "The protocols are breaking," Prendak corrected. "And we're repairing them. Like that pottery art kintsugi. We're putting them back together differently with the cracks showing. That's poetic." "Have you been reading human literature?" "Constantly," Prendak admitted. "Their fiction is fascinating. They write stories about first contact that almost never match what actually happens. But the stories aren't predictions. They're explorations, ways of imagining possibilities before encountering them. Mental preparation for adaptability." Kalashnar mused. "Exactly. They practice adapting in imagination so they're ready to adapt in reality." Down below, the lights of 100 cities glowed against the darkness. Each city full of humans who argued and cooperated, created and destroyed, followed traditions and broke patterns, all simultaneously, all constantly, messy, chaotic, adaptable. Ambassador Chen had been right. Humanity didn't fit models. But maybe models needed to be more flexible. 10 years after first contact, the Galactic Cooperative was larger, more diverse and significantly less predictable than it had been before. The protocols had been revised 17 times, not replaced but expanded, made more flexible given frameworks for handling species that didn't fit frameworks. Kalashnar, now promoted to Grand Theorist for his work in protocol adaptation, gave the keynote address at the annual Cooperative Assembly. Member species from across the spiral arm attended, including the human delegation led by Ambassador Chen Wei. "For 17,000 cycles," Kalashnar began, "we believed we had perfected the science of civilization. We had developed optimal solutions to governance, technology, culture, and diplomacy. We were correct, within the boundaries of our experience. But the galaxy is larger than our experience, and humanity taught us that optimality for known conditions is not the same as resilience against unknown challenges." He gestured to a holographic display showing the cooperative's expansion. "In the decade since humanity achieved associate membership, we have encountered 4 species that would have been incompatible with our previous protocols. We would have passed them by, judged them too chaotic or unpredictable for integration. Instead, we offered them the same choice we gave humanity. Join us while remaining yourselves. All 4 accepted. All four have contributed innovations we would never have developed independently. Ambassador Chen approached the podium when Kalashnoor finished. Her movements more confident now after years of navigating cooperative diplomatic protocols. High Theorist, on behalf of humanity, I want to thank the Voshkari people and the Cooperative Council for your willingness to adapt, she said. When you first arrived on Earth, we were prepared to be disappointed. Every simulation we ran suggested you would try to reshape us into something we weren't. Instead, you learned from us while we learned from you. That's the real meaning of cooperation. She paused, then smiled. Also, I should mention we've made a decision about sharing Earth's location and resources more broadly with